Hey, good morning. It's Russ with MES. Today we're going to go over the receiving procedures, startup, shutdown, and then also a couple operating tips and tricks that in case anything ever happens in the field, you have an easy reference guide to get it back up and running quickly. So to start off, we received the Hurricane 500. It's a 170 horsepower diesel vacuum. When receiving the unit, you just want to do a brief walk around just to make sure everything looks in good condition. If there's anything out of place or looks obscured or doesn't look right, 9 times out of 10, if it doesn't look right, it isn't right. So let's go ahead and do a quick walk around and we'll point out some key features of the machine that we'll be utilizing here shortly. So going around, you want to make sure that all 4 of your outriggers are in place. There's one in each corner. There's one here, one there, driver and passenger. When you're walking around, you just want to continue to look at everything to make sure it looks good. You have your left rear here, and then your right rear as well. And we're going to utilize these to set the machine up in a safe manner. That way you don't have any issues or potential tipping of the machine while it's being utilized in the field. So your machine's being utilized and running on your job site. There's things you want to check daily just to make sure it's running at optimal conditions and also performing as it should. So going around, the first thing you always want to check is your DEF fluid. You can check that here on the display. As the display loads up, you'll see that it's at 99%, 98%. So that tells you how full your DEF tank is. If it gets down below 20%, you always want to go through and refill your DEF tank using the appropriate DEF fuel for this machine. The second thing you want to check is, again, your oil levels. You always want to check your oil levels and top it off as needed. So let's walk around the machine and go through a couple more checkpoints. So going into your DEF, we'll go right back here. This is where you fill up your DEF fluid. The way to pop this cap off is you pop this little tab out and then rotate it counterclockwise, quarter turn, then it releases. And then once it's filled, you put it back in. Same process, just reverse process. Get it in, snap the lock pin in place. That way it keeps it secured. Going through, you have air manifold tanks on the unit. So this is an air manifold tank here, and then there's one inside of the bag house as well. So you want to drain these daily just to make sure the accumulated moisture is drained out and it doesn't get into your pneumatic systems. You simply open the ball valve until the excess moisture is released, and then you close it right back up. Another thing you want to check here too is your fuel level. Like I said, you always want to make sure you have a full tank of fuel before you start the next shift of work. That way you don't run it out of fuel. You can check your gauge right here, fill it up right here, and then also you'll notice there's a drain valve here as well for that second manifold tank we spoke about earlier. It's the same process. You're just going to open the drain valve, drain the excess moisture out, and then once all the moisture is released and out of there, you can just close it right back up and keep on going. So we drain the moisture out of the manifold tank in the bag house. Another thing we want to check as well, we want to do this daily, is down here on this dump door, you'll see how it hinges. You always want to make sure that it hinges freely, but also that there's no wear holes inside the chute or cone itself. Sometimes that can occasionally happen when if you're using a super sack and the edges of the super sack get caught up in the vacuum door, it'll get caught and let little air pockets go through and wear holes in the wear plates and then also your dump doors. You just want to make sure there's no holes in anything mostly. So this is a removable wear plate. It's designed to wear out over use, and it also protects the rest of the items inside this tank here. So if you notice like any little holes developing here, please contact your closest service center or your rental manager and we'll get that resolved for you. Also going around, this is an abrasive wear elbow. So a common place where you'll see a hole is right where this additional heavy duty strap is at. And it's there just for that reason, because as the material goes in and goes over, as it takes that bend, it's always going to rush and go through this edge right here. This is going to wear out, be the first thing to wear out as far as this elbow, and you always want to make sure that you have no holes in this as well. All right, so going around the unit here, you'll see that the outriggers are already preset in the out position. The way you set these outriggers is first you want to start the unit, then you have 2 hydraulic levers here. This one controls the hydraulic jack, which is located in the front of the trailer. You probably utilize this to unload it off of the truck. And then you have your second lever here, which operates the hydraulic tank. So this is what lifts the tank up in the air. That way you can get in the usable position. That way you can stick whatever waste container you want under that bag house there. So when you're setting it up, you want, like I said, start the engine. You want to pull this lever out, and then what you'll see is this hydraulic jack is going to go down. So you're going to drop the nose of the trailer down. Then once it's down, you want to pull the rear outriggers out, get those set, put the safety pins in, and then you want to jack the unit back up using the hydraulic jack. Once the weight is off of the tires here, you'll notice the weight's off the tires. Then you can reset your pins here on the front. Now that your engine's running, you always want to make sure to let your engine warm up and get up to operating temperature before you get going. While you're doing this, you can do a couple things to get this unit set up as well. First thing we did is we grabbed the remote e-stop out of the toolbox that's located on the passenger side fender. You want to get that plugged in and make sure that the push button is pulled out. The second thing we want to do is we're going to go to the bag house here. While it's in the stowed position, it makes it really accessible, so you always want to hook up your vacuum hose connection here, get that secured before you lift the hopper in the air. Next, we're going to lift the bag house up in the air. And again, the way you're going to do that is that you're going to pull this lever here, then you're going to see the bag house progressively raise. You're going to pull this lever here to raise your bag house. You want to lift it up as high as you need to get your waste container under it. You generally don't want to extend it all the way out excessively past what you need to operate, just so you don't have excess dust bloom whenever it goes into a dumping cycle. So once you get your bag house raised up in the air, we're going to go over here to the toolbox. What you're going to pull out here is your bag house locking pins. So we have one here, then we have one here as well. So what you're going to do with these is once your bag house is raised in an upward position, you'll notice that there on the pistons, there is a notch right here. So once it's raised, you're going to undo your safety pin, put this here, slide it in, and then slide your lock pin through there, and then also put in your safety latch as well. So what this is going to do is it's going to keep the bag house from inadvertently lowering or dropping down as it's being utilized. That way it doesn't come down on your waste container, or more importantly, it doesn't come down on the operator as he's going through and changing out your waste containers. So now that the machine is in the full upright position and ready to be utilized, the first thing you want to do while it's at idle is engage your clutch here with the manual PTO lever. You'll see how it comes to a wall and then it's going to snap in place. You always want to engage or disengage your clutch at idle. Never do it at high RPM or you'll destroy the clutch internally and you'll have significant downtime and have to replace the clutch disc in there. Your clutch is engaged. Next thing you want to do is turn on your toggle switches here that turn on your functions. So here you have, starting from the left, you have bag house, vacuum, vibrator, and auger. This machine is not equipped with the auger, so you will not utilize that button, but you'll want to turn your bag house on, your vacuum on, and your vibrator on. One thing you're going to notice is when you turn on your vacuum switch, one, the light's going to turn on here on the rocker switch, and then secondly, your dump timer light is going to be flashing here in the middle. So the way this works is you have a vacuum setting and your dump setting. You adjust how long you want to vacuum using your left dial, which is indicator is measured in minutes. Then the right one is your dump, and that's measured in seconds. Factory recommendation is 3 minutes of vacuum, 30 seconds of dump, and you can adjust these depending on what material you're pulling, how much you're pulling, and how big your waste container is. That way you don't inadvertently overload the machine, but also overload your waste container and have secondary cleanup you have to do. The next thing you're going to do is, once you get those set, you'll notice how the green light turns solid. Once it goes solid, the unit's going to automatically rev up into high RPM and be in a vacuum cycle. And it's going to stay in the vacuum cycle for however long you set your vacuum dial to. For safety purposes, we have this remote e-stop here. And what this is going to do is it breaks the vacuum cycle as soon as you press that button in there. That's why we always wanted to make sure when we started that it was in the out position. But in case somebody gets their hand sucked up, a piece of clothing, or you just notice you're collecting too much material for your waste container and you don't want to overfill it, you can always press this e-stop button in and it'll cause it to go directly into a dump cycle. Then once you get everything reset, and then get situated, you can pull this button right back out, and they'll go right back into that vacuum cycle again, so you can continue to pull material and recover your abrasives or roof rocks or whatever you're recovering. All right, so we're going to shut the machine off. And say it's the end of your work shift and you need to shut the machine off so that way you get wrapped up for the day. So the first thing you're going to want to do is go back to these toggle switches and put them all in the off position. You'll notice that the engine RPMs will rev down. It comes down to an idle. And then you want it to idle for about 5 to 10 minutes. That way it cools off the engine, the turbo, and then also the blower as well has a chance to cool down before it completely shuts off. While it's at idle, you always want to disengage your clutch. Like I said, you always want to disengage it at idle, but also disengage it before you ever shut the engine off. So you're going to pull this off. You're going to secure your remote e-stop in a safe place. That way it doesn't get ran over or damaged through night shift or if the machine's ever transported to a different job. But you always want to make sure this is in a secure place. Once the machine's shut down, as far as idle, clutch is disengaged and everything else, you just want to turn the key in the off position. This machine is outfitted with auxiliary position, which is not utilized. So you always want to make sure that the indicator here is always lined up with the off print on your display here. And another easy way to check it is if you can't pull the key out, you went too far. You always want to make sure you're able to pull the key out, then you can easily just reinstall it back in. That way you don't incidentally drain the battery overnight and have to jump start it the next morning. Then you're just going to secure your latch here, secure that control panel, keep the weather out of it, and there you go. All right, so you're done with your unit. You need to get it packed up and ready for transport. This is the steps we take to get it ready for transport. So first we're going to open the enclosure here that encapsulates our controls for the engine. We want to turn the engine in the on position, let it start. Then the next thing we want to do is we want to bring this bag house down. So while the engine's warming up, we're going to go around. We're going to remove the safety struts as we spoke about in the startup procedures. We're going to remove this one. Then we're going to remove the second one as well. And to remove it, you're just going to remove the safety pin, pull the locking pin out, and then pull the wedge out. And then just reassemble it as such. And then put it back in your toolbox for safekeeping. Once your safety pins are released, you're going to notice that there's a hopper connection hose here. So this hose connects from the safety filter up to the top of the vacuum tank. You'll notice that there's a brace here, right here on the frame. You always want to make sure that when you're stowing the vacuum tank in the fixed position or the stow position, that hose is on this side or closest to the engine of that brace or that X brace. That'll keep it from kinking, it'll keep it from bouncing around, and it makes for safe transport and safe stowage of the unit. You want to have 2 people for this evolution. You want to have an operator and then a spotter or a guide. So your operator is going to use this first hydraulic lever here to drop down the tank. And the easiest way to do that is to push it forward, and that'll slowly drop the tank down. And if you have any questions on which way you need to operate these levers, there's an indicator sticker here that tells you which way to operate those levers for whatever you're trying to accomplish. So as your operator is dropping this tank down, you want to have your spotter and guide here as well. So if you see here on the trailer frame, we have that bracket right there, that's called the latch. And then mounted or welded to the tank is called the hopper latch. So what you want is exactly what you see. You want to put it back in that stowed position. So that pole that goes down, you want to make sure it's between the 2 brackets. And then also that 45-degree cut, you want to make sure it's cupping or hugging the top of the frame rail here on this L-beam. What that's going to do is going to lock it in place and make sure that when it's being transported down the road that the hopper is secured in the fixed position and not bouncing around. Safety note while doing this, never put your arm between any of the pinch points here. You'll see, you have safety decals indicating that. We have different decals here as well stating that, but just never put your arms between things like that. You always want to guide from the outside in, so if you need to, you can push on this. Then this cone swivels as well, so you can rotate the cone using this, and you can move it side to side to help get things lined up. But you never want to reach in or be under the hopper while it's moving in the upward or downward position. Once we got the hopper secured, we're going to disconnect our vacuum hose, get that stowed away. So we got the hopper in the down and fixed and stowed position. The next thing we want to do is we want to get these outriggers retracted and pulled back in. So we're going to do that by using this first lever here on the right side. So we're going to pull this lever out until you see that the front of the jack is all the way down, and then also relieves the tension off of these safety pins. So once the tension's off the pins, you want to pull the jacks up in the stowed position, put the safety pin in while it's in the stowed position for the front. Then once that's done, you're going to lower the tongue of the trailer again. And you're going to lower it almost all the way down to the ground until you see that the tension is off of the rear outriggers. That way it gives it accessibility and mobility to reset these outriggers in the stowed position. Once the tongue of the trailer's down, what you're going to do is you're going to pull the safety pin here. You're going to retract this pin or this outrigger all the way up, and then you're going to pull this pin here and slide the outrigger all the way in. And then once all the holes lined up, you put your safety pins back in, and then your unit's going to be ready for transport. All right, so your machine's been on your job site, it's been operating well, and then, you know, there may be some common issues that do occur. You know, say, for example, the vacuum's not sucking like it used to. The engine is bogging down, or you ran it out of fuel and you can't get it back started. We're going to go through a couple of things to help troubleshoot these items and then also get you back up and running in the field as well. Say the machine was running the day before just fine, it was pulling just fine, and then the next morning it's not running as it should, or, you know, it progressively stops sucking as good as it should. One thing we're certainly going to check is your vacuum gauge here. So this tells you how much vacuum the machine is going to be pulling. Right now the machine is off, so it's at 0. But when it's fully deadheaded at the inlet, it's going to pull between 25 and 28 inches on this vacuum gauge. That's completely deadheaded. So what you want to ensure that is you have adequate vacuum when you're putting on a hose and things like that. And running it, you'll see how this gauge significantly goes up, 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 and then when you start pulling abrasive, it'll continue to go up. Well, for diagnostic purposes, what you always want to do is you want to disconnect your hopper hose here from where you hooked up your vacuum hose. You want to disconnect this hose here. Then you want to get a piece of plywood or a board or something similar that can cover that opening. Then you want to, while it's in the vacuum cycle, you want to deadhead it using a board. And what you're looking for is you want to see how high of a vacuum this gauge is going to pull. And it should pull above, you know, above 25, above 25. If it's like at 22 or 23, it's still maybe fine, but generally it's going to be between 20 and 25. So if you see it where it's only pulling like 10, 15 and not reaching 20, that's a good indicator that your filters are needed for service or due for service. So in that case, please reach out to your sales rep or your account manager and we'll schedule the service for you. Say your machine you shut it down for the night and then you're going into starting the next morning and it won't rev up and it won't go into a vacuum cycle. 9 times out of 10, it's going to be your remote e-stop here. A lot of times what happens is, you know, either the button's pushed in or stayed in, or if it rained that night before and they left it on the ground, it could have filled it up with water and messed up the switch that's inside of there. So first thing you always want to check is your e-stop. Make sure it's pulled out, make sure it's functioning, and make sure it's, you know, most importantly, plugged in. If you incidentally ran your machine out of fuel and it's having a hard time starting, this is the steps we're going to take to get that up and running. So a diesel engine, it cannot have any air bubbles within the fuel system. If it does, it's not going to open the injectors, and in that case, it's not going to inject the fuel into the engine to get it to fire up. So first thing we always want to do is just make sure that the machine is topped off with fuel again. So we'll go over to the gauge here. We're going to make sure the machine's full. If not, let's go fill the fuel tank up right here. And, you know, at least put a quarter of a tank. If not, just fill it up all the way. That way you can keep the machine running once you do get it started. Secondly, we're going to go over here to the front of the engine. So on every diesel engine, there's a primer pump, or some people call it a thumb pump, or what, you know, there's different terminologies for it, but essentially it's what's used to fill the fuel filters without having to take the fuel filters off. So on this machine, it has a primer pump or a thumb pump, which is located behind the fuel filters. There's a fuel filter here, and there's a fuel filter here. So there's 2 fuel filters on this machine. There's one that filters the fuel as it goes through the primary filter, and then once it goes from this filter, it goes to a secondary filter, then goes to your injection pump and then to your injectors. The one we want to prime, or at least focus on priming, is the second one. So on the top of this fuel filter, you'll see this plastic screw right here. So what you're going to do is you're going to loosen that screw up, You don't want to take it all the way out, but you want it to be very loose. Then you're going to get your thumb pump, which is located behind the wiring harness here. And then you're going to pump that thumb pump until you see fuel squirting out of the screw. What that's going to do is that's going to refill the filters with fuel, and they get those fuel lines primed up again. Once you get adequate fuel squirting out of it, where there's no air pockets or anything coming out, just solid streams of fuel, you're going to tighten that screw up, and then you're going to try to crank it over again. If for some reason it doesn't crank over, and it cranks but it doesn't fire up, that means you have more air in your fuel system. So we're going to have to continue to bleed that air out. So we're going to repeat this step of repriming the fuel filters here in the fuel system. Then we're going to go on the back of the machine to where we're going to see the fuel injection pump. So the fuel injection pump is located right behind here. And what that does is that's what actually pulls the fuel from the fuel tank and then injects it into the injectors. So you're going to find the fuel injection pump. You're going to see hard lines that come off the injection pump that go to the top of the engine. So what you're going to do is once you trace those lines to where it goes into the top of the engine, you want to get an appropriate wrench, starting from left to right, loosen the nut that's on there that holds that injection line on, and then have somebody crank it until fuel starts squirting out of that line. Once you see fuel, you want to tighten it up, and then you want stop cranking. You want to tighten up your injector line, then move on to cylinder number 2 and 3 and 4, and rinse and repeat that process. Generally, once you get to 3 of them, the engine will fire itself up. It'll be a little hiccupy or sputtery initially, but it will push those air bubbles out of the injectors, and it should run smoothly going forward. So that's how you utilize the Hurricane 500 from MES from start to finish. Thank you for watching, and if you ever need anything, please reach out.